German cameras filmed Hitler as a war hero in 1940. They spoke freely since these were silent films. They had no idea their words would be heard later. AI can analyze these images for the first time. It's thanks to lip-reading experts. These historical insights reveal the inner workings of the Nazi machine. A swift victory over France. This truly is a triumph for the German Empire. I kept my word. So I'm relieved. I never liked the French. Just like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and later Russia, we're planning an all-out assault. Thank you. France and Great Britain had been at war with the Third Reich since September 1, 1939, after Poland's invasion. Nothing seemed to halt Adolf Hitler's quest for expansion. So everyone was mobilizing their forces, waiting for the conflict to erupt. This was the so-called phony war. In France, Great Britain, and Nazi Germany alike, the goal was to solidify alliances for the coming fight. On March 28, 1940, the Führer met Benito Mussolini at the Brenner Pass, on the border of the Reich and Fascist Italy. Hitler wanted this meeting because, in a way, he planned to inform his ally. And he also expected Mussolini to join the war. Well, Hitler was still very eager for Mussolini to get actively involved in the war. It's always better to fight on two fronts than one, especially when you're planning an attack. So a coordinated strike from the east and south would make military sense too. What's interesting is that Hitler was misleading the Italians, making them think he was sharing details, especially about plans for Denmark and Norway. But he avoided giving any info on Belgium and France, because there wasn't a true bond of trust with the Italians. Mussolini was very hesitant because the Italian army wasn't ready. He'd known this for a while, seeing it not just in Ethiopia but also in Albania a year prior. And neither Count Chano, his son-in-law and foreign minister, nor his chief of staff favored war against France. Hitler was clearly pushing Mussolini's decision here. Barely reassured by Italy's potential involvement, the Nazis launched their first offensive in the West. On May 10, 1940, they attacked the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium. In the Netherlands, the invasion concluded on May 14 after the Luftwaffe bombed Rotterdam. For Göring, chief of staff of the Nazi Air Force, this was a personal victory. The Reich Marshal was on an inspection tour of the newly captured Amsterdam airport. He was with an officer from his general staff. Everything had to be set for the attack on France. Hitler knew nothing about the Air Force. He had no experience in that area. He still saw himself, in the trenches of World War I. He saw himself as an army man and gave Göring full control over the Air Force's operational and strategic war planning. Officially, we have 40 fighters, but in reality, we only have 20. The planes were reinforced here and there. See? In the front and here. Very good. Right here at the front by the block. Do you see? You did a great job. Göring was completely out of his depth. He had some expertise in a few areas like engines and parachutes, as he used to trade in engines and parachutes, so he had a bit of technical knowledge there. But that was it. How's the condition of this bomb? The propeller springs are engaged, but the engines are working fine, and the overall condition is good. What's interesting is seeing here that there were quite a few technical issues. In other words, Hitler had a powerful weapon for his Blitzkrieg strategy, but there were technical problems, fine-tuning issues that would worsen until reaching a critical point for Germany in 1942-43. The attack will happen tomorrow or the day after. We're planning the strategy for the best possible attack. He built the German Air Force from scratch, and it grew quickly. He brought in a guy named Gerhard Milch. We're at the border. Overcoming them would be a success. With this request from the F, we will revolutionize air travel. It seems the technology isn't quite there yet. Does it make sense to use our engineers for this research? No, no. We're not there yet. He can have major producers like Mercedes-Benz make the engines. It's a monumental industry, created from nothing. Herr Göring, I'll keep you updated. Give the Führer my regards. Ouch, my hip. The Nazi leadership was formed by very determined men, but it was developed hastily, without full technical readiness. Its Achilles heel was the poor health of its minister. He was a drug abuser, in fact, addicted to morphine. What's more, he was a megalomaniac who dreamed of luxury and power. He was extremely weak, and due to his substance abuse, he had trouble maintaining his calculations or how he should. And from then on, there was a certain negligence regarding Göring, if not outright negligence, which in this case cost material and human lives. This former chancellor of the German Luftwaffe, however, his men continued to exploit and use him. He stayed close to them, praising them highly. What is your name? And what is your rank? Excellent, outstanding. Thank you, Reichsmarschall. Reichsmarschall.
Herr Reichsmarschall.
I congratulate you. Thank you very much, thank you. Exemplary. Göring was presented by the regime's propaganda as the approachable human face of Nazism. This is precisely the image we see here as well. We see a man who genuinely cares about his soldiers' well-being, who speaks with them, and so on. He was burnt out by the technicians, but he couldn't quite manage everything. He was the type of person who would give up. However, his real interests, particularly concerning the Netherlands, were in the pursuit of artworks. That was his true passion. But the cameras were present, so he continued with his act. He was putting on a show to find artworks and create flattering reports for the Führer. It was largely due to the effectiveness of certain members of the Marshal's inner circle that the Luftwaffe achieved success. With our power in the Air Force, we rule the skies. Reichsmarschall? This is for the Führer. Are you coming too? We still have some essential tasks to complete for our Air Force, in order to accomplish our mission. All the best. The entire Luftwaffe was in a dire state. The only person aware of this was the former Lufthansa representative, Milch. Milch was Göring's former superior. This means Lufthansa had been sending bribes to parliament members. And when Göring was in parliament, he accepted bribes from Milch. Their positions then became reversed. And it was Göring who supported me because he was trusted and understood everything about aviation. But there was a significant issue. Milch was Jewish. Milch was of mixed Jewish heritage. He had Jewish ancestry, but Göring protected him. Milch was a staunch nationalist, a conservative German nationalist. Many Jewish individuals naturally felt German and were surprised when the Nazis denied them the right to be German. And Göring declared, "Never mind, I'll handle this situation." He arranged for Milch's mother to appear with a certificate, stating that Milch's biological father was not Milch himself, but rather a certain Baron von Bahr who was selected by Göring, possessing an impeccable Aryan lineage that traced back to Charlemagne. Consequently, Milch was officially recognized as an honorary Aryan. Caused quite a stir within the Luftwaffe. One Luftwaffe general remarked that to prove her son wasn't Jewish, Madame Milch claimed she was a listener. It was simply heartbreaking. On the day of the attack against France, May 13, 1940, Adolf Hitler and Hermann Göring were advancing into southern Belgium, just a few miles from the French border. With the Luftwaffe poised to strike French positions, Göring was right there on the front lines. Once they arrived, Hitler and Göring were warmly welcomed by all the soldiers and officers preparing to participate in the upcoming offensive, as well as Hitler's chief of staff. What is your rank? Unterscharfer actively engaged on the front lines. I'm truly impressed by you. It's an honor to have met you. This is for our country. That is what I am dedicated to. That's wonderful. General Wilhelm Keitel, the chief of the German army, responded to Marshal Göring. Keitel was the head of the OKW, the High Command of the Armed Forces, and Jodl was his deputy. He was the chief of the operations branch. So, in theory, these two men were leading the German army. But in reality, they were simply following Hitler's commands. They weren't allowed to make any independent decisions. Keitel was, in fact, referred to as La Keitel or La Kai. He was a subordinate, or as the English would say, a yes-man. Keitel ultimately served as the singular, most important figure, deeply devoted to Hitler, and this intense loyalty to Hitler and the political system overshadowed everything else. A second man closely involved in the offensive was Walter von Brauchitsch, who commanded the army. He too was under Hitler's direct orders, as there was no longer a dedicated minister of armies. These are the preparations to achieve our objective, my Führer. This is how we must advance. Yes, Hitler had assumed nearly all the leadership responsibilities, but he still required an administrator for the army. Von Brauchitsch wasn't known for a strong personality, but he reliably carried out orders. The generals and marshals stood at attention because he was the leader, and because of the immense security and protection apparatus behind him, the SS and the Gestapo. So they all stood at attention. From their operations room, the Nazis thwarted all the Allied strategies. The German forces effectively employed tactics of surprise and rapid movement. The synchronized use of tanks and aircraft concentrated substantial resources at critical points along the Allied front. They caught the French and Belgian troops off guard with their swift actions. The vanguard of the German army, comprising a dozen armored divisions, penetrated the Ardennes region, which had been considered impassable. And the engagement will likely occur here before 5 a.m. Yes, my assessment is that there will be some resistance due to this bridge. From this position, it heads left into the hills, targeting their right flank. Following that, from here we have a freeway, and then it will be up to the infantry to slowly move into position. This route carries considerable risk. We will advance here in such a way that a secure point is established, and we will then proceed along the route in this direction. Everything is unfolding precisely as scheduled, perfectly according to our grand design. Just as it was for the Polish, the Czechs, and then the Russians, we are going to mount a massive, all-out offensive. From that point, we're initiating a truly unconventional military strategy, and so much more. We will launch an assault from every direction along this entire front. The Battle of France kicks off remarkably well, securing an immediate tactical triumph. The German expectation was an invasion through Belgium, then a push into France from that side. But Erich von Manstein, a brilliant German general, conceives of an entirely different approach. His plan is to actually advance through the seemingly impassable Ardennes forest, then cross the Meuse River, and then push the tanks all the way directly to Dunkirk. This then raises the crucial question. What should the Germans do about the British and French soldiers cornered and trapped on the beaches of a now surrounded Dunkirk? Adolf Hitler made the decision to halt the advance of his troops at that point. He assigned Hermann Göring the specific mission of capturing Dunkirk. Göring's own marshal confidently assured him that Dunkirk could be utterly destroyed using only the air force. This directive serves as your guiding principle. Exercise courage and unwavering determination. Are there any perceived difficulties with our established plan? None whatsoever. We must proceed with its execution. We'll brilliantly maneuver to encircle them, then allow them to be caught in our carefully laid trap. Winston Churchill famously declared Dunkirk as Britain's finest hour. In reality, he knew it was a significant military defeat. Yet, miraculously, we managed to evacuate an incredible 355,000 British and French soldiers. The true errors surrounding Dunkirk lie in who bears the responsibility, and from the available evidence, it appears Hitler actually wanted the British to escape at that specific moment. He even stated at one point that it's beneficial for an army to experience a complete defeat. It teaches them about loss, and then they won't dare to return for more. He was deeply invested in seeing the British humiliated and returning home, and he hoped that by offering them a peace settlement, they would withdraw from the war entirely. Was it a shrewd political calculation or a grave strategic military blunder? Meanwhile, German divisions relentlessly continued to break through France's defensive lines almost everywhere. By the middle of June, the French government had effectively surrendered. On his end, Hitler was personally overseeing the final waves of offensives. We'll secure resistance in one area after another, and then later we'll shift to the encirclement maneuvers. Here we will establish our reinforcements. This decision is driven by the defensive advantages of this specific position. What about the approach here? Yes, but that particular route leads directly to a strengthening of our offensive. We're going to execute a swift maneuver here. Indeed, from this point forward, I would still recommend disrupting their rear supply lines. That's an excellent strategy. Truly a superb strategy. So, our initial step is negotiation, especially when their situation is already dire with water up to their necks. That's precisely how we operate. As the battles decisively shifted in favor of the Germans, Göring met with Hitler. The Führer was expressing frustration about the communication breakdowns between their two chiefs of staffs. Yes, communication is excellent, but unfortunately not between us. The French army will soon be compelled to surrender. A message has arrived for the signing. Excellent, please bring a pen. We are becoming strong, remarkably strong. Invincible. Today is a truly good day. My stomach isn't growling quite so much today. Yes, would you like to depart now, Mr. Wagner? We can speak on the phone later. Travel home safely. Why does the world erupt into war? 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 France's strategy was to regroup behind the Maginot Line. They were essentially copying the established doctrines of World War I. They were relying on the outdated models of World War I, clinging to old strategies. With the notable exception of Charles de Gaulle, France had failed to grasp that the Panzerwaffe, the armored divisions, were playing an entirely new and strategic role. This is precisely why France was so utterly blindsided by the rapid German advance. On June 14th, German armies successfully reached Paris, which was subsequently declared an open city to prevent the kind of devastation that had occurred in Warsaw or Rotterdam. On June 17th, Marshal Philippe Pétain formed his government and formally requested an armistice. The Germans extended their military offensive operations until Wednesday, June 24, 1940. They had already occupied two-thirds of France. For Germany, this was an absolutely complete victory. Admiral Raeder was the first high-ranking officer to emerge from the operational silence. Oh, I am truly impressed by that. Would you like me to prepare that now? That's something I can certainly laugh about. Yes, I will go ahead and get undressed. Yes, with that, I would like to have a drink. I feel happy and cheerful today. Oh, absolutely. For the Führer. To his health. Thank you. Thank you. The French requested an armistice, not a surrender, because a surrender would have been a military act, signifying a profound loss for the army. No, they desired an armistice, which is essentially a civilian agreement that would facilitate the cessation of hostilities, bringing the conflict to a close as swiftly as possible and crucially and above all to combat communism, because for Pétain and his allies the true adversary wasn't Germany, but the communists. Following their overwhelming victory over France, Hitler summoned Mussolini to Munich on June 18, 1940, just before the commencement of the Italian offensive into southern France. As part of his strategy to preserve France, Hitler effectively dismissed Mussolini's territorial ambitions. The Duce would only receive territories that he was allocated in the armistice before its final conclusion. Consequently, Italy was only granted a very modest portion of French territory. How are you doing today? Well, I'm relieved because, frankly, I don't particularly care for the French. So, you've won this. You are now responsible for looking after the French. What Hitler was counting on was having a government in France that could act as a sort of buffer between the French population and the Reich, which would significantly reduce the burden on the occupying troops. So, there was this underlying idea of not being overly harsh with the French. The armistice, which was scheduled to be signed in Rome on June 23, would not be entirely satisfactory for Mussolini. However, Hitler made a gesture of alliance solidarity so that Mussolini could maintain his dignity, because Mussolini's regime was clearly facing a significant legitimacy crisis. The Italians had not militarily defeated France in the war, but Hitler very generously awarded them an occupation zone in southeastern France. For the signing of the armistice between France and Germany, Hitler selected Compiègne, the very location where Germany had signed its own armistice back in 1918. This rotunda held significant symbolic importance. Signing here would symbolically absolve the shame of their defeat in World War I. Hitler paid very close attention to how the French humiliation would be orchestrated. The French were forced to accept all of Germany's terms, which, naturally, were quite harsh. At the same time, the French felt a slight sense of relief, because they assumed Hitler might have even more demands, such as occupying the entire country or seizing control of the French Navy. This wasn't the case, so the French experienced a sort of cowardly relief. For Hitler, this was his ultimate revenge, a symbolic repayment for Germany's defeat in the First World War. All these demands clearly demonstrate our absolute superiority. It was the perfect revenge for the First World War. These demands all demonstrate to you our absolute superiority. Despite his euphoria, Hermann Göring still expressed his immense zeal alongside Hitler. Herr Hitler, I'm not satisfied at all. I am not satisfied. We could have extracted so much more from this armistice. Calm down, Herr Göring. I'm in charge here. I know precisely how to enforce my demands. Let's get going. In the end, they were both correct. For Göring, it was incredibly simple to exploit the French people's capabilities, and all they needed was the understanding that they could go much, much further. But Hitler had a more calculating, intelligent perspective, one that focused on preserving French dignity and simply using the French to further his own agenda. And this led to the Vichy government, which was a very clever move. On July 6, 1940, Hitler returned to Berlin to celebrate Germany's conclusive victory over the French Union. He was welcomed with a triumphant parade, reviewing several divisions returning from the front. This marked his final military parade and the last time he received such a surging ovation. So, Heil! Wonderful! Wonderful! This is a massive propaganda success. This entire event is a triumph for the German Reich. I have kept my promise. He returns to Berlin. The victory ceremony that took place that day saw participation from 2 million Germans. And the people who were there that day, the Germans present, said they truly believed they would win the war. Yes, it was undeniably Hitler's finest moment. And it was undeniably the moment he had the greatest support from public opinion, especially from the old conservatives, because Hitler accomplished what the Kaiser had failed to do, in building the German Empire, which made him especially popular. Meanwhile, far from the chaos of war and the rise of the Third Reich in Bavaria at Obersalzberg in Hitler's home, Eva Braun was with her parents, Friedrich and Franziska, and her two sisters Ilse and Gretel during the quiet, beautiful summer of 1940. Cheers! Cheers! I know how to drink this. In one go. So hot. Exactly. Yes, of course. I'm a little tipsy. I don't think so. Eva Braun was at the Kelstein house. In 1939, the NSDAP party decided to give Hitler a gift for his 50th birthday. They presented him with a tea house, the Eagle's Nest, located on the Kelstein, but Hitler didn't want to go there because he had a fear of heights and it wasn't stable. Eva's younger sister was always present, and it was perfectly normal for their parents to visit the two sisters. And in fact, her parents were quite proud that their daughter was the Führer's girlfriend. During all of this, Göring was playing one of his favorite roles, that of the corrupt and avaricious collector of beautiful objects. He was a man who relished material pleasures, fine food, and luxury. Göring loved acquiring treasures. He loved objects. His home in the north of Berlin was constantly being expanded to make room for all the treasures he acquired with each new conquest of the Reich. Yes, it's beautiful. These are the kinds of pieces I collect. Look at this handle, feel this goldsmith work. Beautifully balanced. I can cut anything with this. Yes, and the axe, you've been using that for a long time. So lovely. So solid. It is indeed beautiful. Yes, these are gifts for you. This is a very special handle. The axe is magnificent, and I'm so glad you like it. What is the reason he appeared so early in the world? This is becoming more and more impressive. 1945 at the defeat of the Reich. Thank you, Mr. F. Oh, thank you. A touching congratulation. Thank you for your attention. Your works must be at the forefront. We will continue to increase production. As an industrialist, Krupp was extremely important. Krupp's heavy industry was manufacturing weapons and supplying tanks. At that time, Krupp was also building trucks for transporting troops, all of which represented an immensely significant production. Without Krupp, Hitler could not have fought this war. They weren't sentimental individuals, so this was done to demonstrate just how much Hitler was relying on him. And at the same time, Krupp was doing a lot for Hitler's prestige, and Hitler was doing a lot for Krupp's prestige. So, for propaganda purposes, they needed to be seen together. It all made a lot of sense. It was a way of solidifying their alliance. And beyond that, it symbolized a union between a new power that emerged in 1933 and an industrialist who had greatly benefited from this new power. And people like Gustav Krupp benefited more than just prospered from all of this. They literally feasted on the Reichsmark. A few weeks later, on August 24, 1940, a significant event took place. Since July, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, had been bombing British infrastructure as part of the Battle of Britain. But on that day, one bomber, believing it was targeting a refinery, mistakenly dropped its payload on London, a target that was only to be attacked on Hitler's personal orders. In retaliation, on the night of August 25, 1940, the British succeeded in dropping bombs on Berlin to the astonishment of the Germans. In the Berghof, in anticipation of future bombings, Hitler launched a series of works. Barely recovered from the first bombing of his capital in mid-October 1940, Hitler learned that his Italian ally was preparing an invasion of Greece. In imitating the Nazis and securing his own Mediterranean empire, Mussolini intended to seize the Balkans and Greece. Mussolini, of course, had always dreamed of reviving that ancient nationalist ambition of the country to become the dominant state within the Mediterranean and to control the Mediterranean, but also to build upon the relatively small colonial empire that Rome had already before Mussolini ascended to power. On October 28, 1940, Adolf Hitler went to Florence as a matter of urgency to try to recover control of the situation. He was furious at being presented with a fait accompli, especially since Greece was rather pro-German. During their 6-hour meeting, Hitler and Mussolini attempted to find a solution regarding Greece. It all looks very civil, but in fact it was a very tricky meeting. Why? Because Mussolini had decided to attack Greece without telling Hitler. He wanted it to be a coup, and Hitler was furious in fact because that was not what he wanted at all. And at the same time, he saw that he would be obliged to help the Italians, which was not at all in his plans. So all courtesy aside, Hitler was not very happy at all. The British had returned to Europe. They landed in Greece because they could now help Greece against the Italian invasion. And that put the Romanian oil wells within range of British planes, which could bomb the oil fields from Thessaloniki, for example. And for Hitler, in strategic terms, Romanian oil was an absolute necessity. 2 days later, after this bad news, Hitler also realized that Britain would not be so easily pushed out of the war. He wanted to get back in control. He therefore came up with the idea of setting up an anti-British coalition to attack its empire. It was in that context that he organized a meeting with Philippe Pétain on October 30th, 1940. First of all, he wants to meet Marshal Pétain. He's the leader of Vichy France. Vichy France is the puppet government that Hitler creates after he occupied France. There are 2 parts of France, the occupied area, which the German troops occupy, and that includes Paris, and there's also this Vichy regime, which is a puppet regime, but it leaves France with its navy, for example, and with its empire. So he's trying to get Pétain to join an anti-British alliance. We are looking forward to your decision.
Bonjour.
I thank you for this welcome. We are your friends. France wishes the end of the war. This was also Pétain's attempt to take up a position in Germanic Europe. Pétain thus made it clear that France was more than just a puppet state, that it wanted to take part in, and above all, that it wanted this united Europe. And it was quite clear that Pétain was Hitler's ally par excellence. Except that the meeting with Hitler was a huge surprise for the French, because a Pétain who was a bit of a shield protecting the French was acceptable. But a Pétain who advocated collaboration with Germany, that is to say with the enemy, the victor, the occupier, the torturer, that was not at all the same. This was the first real shift in public opinion with regard to Marshal Pétain, because, in fact, the analysis of Pétain, of his government, of his cabinet, of his advisors, was that a new order was being imposed on Europe. Hitler's journey then continued to Hunday, on the border with Spain, where he met with Franco, the head of the Spanish dictatorship. The meeting between Pétain and Hitler may have been warm, but the one with Franco was icy. Hitler was furious with Franco. Hitler felt he had helped him a lot during the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939 without the slightest return from the Spanish dictator. So they meet up and Franco, and he does this every time there's a discussion. Hitler says, "Look, I want." He said, "Join the war. We'll invade Gibraltar for you, and then we'll start to, hit out at the British possessions in North Africa. So you join the war." It didn't work out. There was to be no operation against Gibraltar. And what Hitler couldn't know was that basically the British had bought off a certain number of Franco's generals so that they would influence Franco to avoid going to war. So Franco says, "Well, I'd like to join the war." He says, "Of course, I'm really a supporter of you," he says, "but I've got a lot of economic problems to cope with." There was a number of reasons why he couldn't go to war anyway. One was that the Americans and the British would have immediately taken over the Canary Islands. His supplies of oil would have been interrupted. He depended a lot on Britain and America, so he couldn't afford to go to war, but of course no one knew that at the time, and in the end, they go away and he talks to Ribbentrop later. And he says to Ribbentrop, "Should we meet him again?" And Hitler says, "I don't think we should meet him again." He says, "I'd rather have each one of my teeth pulled out with a pair of pliers." In parallel, Hitler, who was still hesitant about opening a new front in the east, was playing a waiting game. On November 12, 1940, the Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov arrived in Berlin. He was there to discuss the respective spheres of influence of the USSR and Nazi Germany in Central Europe. The Soviets specifically wanted the withdrawal of German troops stationed in Finland and also addressed guarantees for the Balkan situation and the Black Sea coast. At this point, the Nazis insisted that the pact signed with Moscow be honored. It's quite obvious that in the initial phase of the war, the pact between Germany and the Soviet Union was absolutely crucial for Germany, as Germany was receiving a massive supply of economic resources, essential raw materials, and provisions from the Soviet Union. Stalin was perfectly pleased with this arrangement, and Molotov arrived to discuss the future of their relationship. Would it become a formal alliance, or would they simply remain friends? This entire visit was a rather unusual experience for him. Up until this point, it had always been the Germans, like Ribbentrop, who traveled to Moscow. Specifically, Ribbentrop, Molotov's counterpart and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, had gone to sign the German-Soviet Pact on August 23, 1939. So, this marked the very first time the Soviets had journeyed to Germany. Molotov felt deeply insulted, like he was being treated as some sort of circus exhibit. He understood very well the kind of people he was dealing with, and he realized he was part of a propaganda stunt he couldn't control. This was unacceptable to him, as Molotov was a staunch Bolshevik, accustomed to being in charge of everything. To help Molotov feel more comfortable, Hitler was joined by Hermann Göring, the Reich's second-in-command. Göring, known for his approachable and genial demeanor, was tasked with the responsibility of reassuring Molotov about the Nazis' intentions. For both the Nazis and the Bolsheviks, this alliance was a union against all odds. These two regimes, with their diametrically opposed ideologies, should have been the most bitter of adversaries. By November 1940, Hitler was still hesitant about launching an attack on the Soviet Union, and his foreign minister, von Ribbentrop, proposed an alternative strategy: to defeat the British Empire with the help of the Soviet Union. In this context, Hitler was also gauging the Soviet Union's readiness to pursue expansionist aims beyond Europe, with German backing. Molotov inquired about the future course of action following our pact. Molotov, the pact between our two nations holds immense significance for us. When he invited Molotov over, he was hoping to explore one last chance for an agreement, essentially a division of the world. The proposal was for the Soviets to focus on controlling the Middle East and Asia, regions that held no particular interest for Hitler, in exchange for the Soviets acknowledging German dominance over all of Eastern Europe. Molotov's response was essentially, "We're not interested. Our primary desire is for Finland. We also want the Baltic states, Czechoslovakia, and Turkey. Crucially, we want access to the Dardanelles, the route to the Mediterranean Sea and warmer waters." Consequently, by the conclusion of the meeting between Hitler and Molotov, Hitler was extremely displeased. He declined to attend the farewell dinner scheduled for the following evening. This was a rather unusual decision when dealing with such a high-ranking official. This meeting proved to be highly consequential because, following it, Hitler definitively resolved to invade the Soviet Union. And within just 1 month, Operation Barbarossa was conceptualized and officially sanctioned by the military. As of July 1940, Hitler had already committed to invading the Soviet Union, and these final attempts at negotiation concluded without any agreement. In the autumn of 1940, it became necessary to confront the reality of the situation. The Western Front had not yet been subdued. The air campaign against Great Britain appeared to be a losing battle. Another complication for Hitler was the need to support Mussolini in Greece. This intervention disrupted his timetable for attacking the Soviet Union, forcing a delay of several weeks. In an effort to safeguard against potential assaults from Britain, he ordered the construction of extensive fortifications, stretching from the North Sea all the way down to the southern coast of France.